Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Phil at the Movies. I'm your host, Phil Walsh, and coming to you today with an extraordinary episode, an excellent episode, if you will. This is one I have been looking forward to for a while because not only am I going to be discussing and reacting to the third and possibly, and put that in quotes, possibly final installment in the X trilogy, but today, I am going to be discussing it also with my friend, co-host of the DC Unlimited pod that we do together with our buddy Chris Evans. And he's also the host of his own show, Tis the Podcast. So if you're looking for all things Christmas orientated, particularly when it comes to holiday films, Mr. Anthony Caruso is your guy. And today he is joining me to discuss, react, dissect, if you will, MaXXXine. So, Anthony, welcome back to the show, buddy.
So glad to be here, especially to talk the final installment of what may be one of my favorite trilogies of all time. Not
Oh,
to
okay.
bury the lead.
Oh, well, we're starting early. You might have guessed it, but I'm a little muted right now. Not no, not muted in terms of the microphone, but muted in terms of my reaction. Someone actually messaged me the other day because they knew I was seeing or had seen the film, and they said, "Oh, Phil, you didn't post a tweet." And first I'm like, "Okay, wow, thank you for noticing." You did see my reaction, but there was a strategic reason to that. One, I wanted to save everything for this show because I've had a lot of time to marinate with this film, and well, we'll certainly get into it, but I think it's fair to say that this is going to be um, a polar opposites in some cases with our reactions. Anthony is definitely on one side of the fence. I am certainly on the other side, but that's okay. That's honestly what I'm most excited about for this episode is because we both have very different reactions to this film. And again, we're coming from a place of real love and affection because both of us have enjoyed Pearl and X, and certainly the anticipation for MaXXXine was extraordinary, if you will, pun intended. So this
I
is
love it. Fill at the movies. Let me fill you in. Extraordinary,
what I
extra
do here.
special.
Like I said, come for the the movie reviews, stay for the puns and the quips. That's what it's all about here. Um, but before we do begin, everybody, just want to say thank you as always for tuning in each Friday and hearing what I have to say on movies and cinema alike. If you have not done so already, if you could rate and review this podcast on Apple, it certainly helps with that pesky thing called the algorithms. And if you're watching this on YouTube, first off, welcome. And hit that subscribe, hit the like button, stay plugged in so you can stay up to date with all of my philosophies, if you will, on movies and whatnot. But all right, I've done enough sort of housekeeping right now. Let's get right into it. And I just want to start with you, buddy. Immediate reactions upon seeing MaXXXine.
I saw it twice. The first time I saw it, I left a little, I enjoyed it, but I left a little underwhelmed. Uh, the trailer sold us on one thing, I think, and we got something different. Seeing it the second time, I adjusted my expectations accordingly, and I enjoyed it a lot more. I understand what Ty West was going for, which we can get into. Whether or not that works for some people, I think it really boils down to your personal film preferences. Um, but yeah, I enjoyed it a lot more. I still have my issues with it. It is far from a perfect movie, but I will say this, that I was along for the ride. The first two acts in particular, I was along for the ride and thinking to myself, this is as good as anything we got in X or Pearl. Like, it was really good, those first two acts. The third act is where things went off the rails a little bit. Execution. I'll say execution because story-wise, I think it was fine. It was the execution of that particular plot point. Um, but yeah, I liked it. I actually surprised that the more people who seem to see it on social media, the more man on an island I am becoming. Especially because it did get pretty good critical reviews. Uh, but I will say right off the bat, I think this is going to be one of those films that will age better with time. When people can watch the trilogy back to back to back, I think people will find a new appreciation for this. Um, because I think the expectations game for all of us played into feelings here. And yeah, that's my brief thoughts before. I'm curious to hear yours.
So I will we'll get into it, but yeah, we're here to rumble everybody. No. It's good, all in good fun. No, so I was thinking about it afterwards, and by no means was my reaction as visceral as some people had back in October of 2022 when another controversial third entry in a at the time trilogy came out. Of course, I'm speaking about Halloween Ends. And while again my reaction to this film was by no means on the level that some people had for that film, I I can understand and sympathize how people had that more so now given what happened with this film. And again, I'm not trying to equate the two one way or the other. I mean, certainly if anyone has been listening to this show from the beginning, I am a huge fan of Halloween Ends and was one of its earliest offenders, but I can understand it is not for everybody. And again, while I wouldn't say I was fully in that reaction camp coming out of MaXXXine, I can understand how this one really is. I don't want to say jarring in a way, but it's a bit of a letdown, particularly when you have the other two films in the trilogy. And certainly it's unfair to compare this to both Pearl and X because they're different films and they're telling
Completely different
different stories.
films.
Exactly. They're telling different stories, they're different time periods, everything, different tones. But I think you can't help but have a little bit of expectations and sort of build things up in your mind, and then when you see the film and it's I don't want to say like it completely subverts your expectations, but it's a very different film. And on the one hand, like, major props because it's in keeping what the other two films set out to do, which was to tell a different story and have a different tone, even almost a slightly different subgenre, but still kind of have this overarching theme. This one definitely takes some risk. This is not X by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, there are some moments that are, you might call slasher uh, moments, if you will, but it's not on the same level as X, and it's not on the same level of psychological horror as Pearl. This is much more of an 80s thriller in a way, kind of almost like an upgraded B movie. Think
I would
Brian De
say
Palma,
I would say
definitely.
an erotic 80s
Yeah,
thriller, which were big at the time. And
which again, I like. I salute that. Like, I mean, I get what West was going for. This is very much a film noir kind of vibe, very sleazy, almost like you said, an erotic thriller. It comes down to, I think, just the way it was executed, and particularly once we get to the third act, it just sort of, I don't want to say it goes into cliches, but it to me it almost plays it a little too safe, and it went in a direction that I sort of thought in the back of my mind, okay, if there's one storyline they're going to probably pull for, it's the low-hanging fruit that was sort of teased at us at the end of X, which, I mean, I'll just get into it just for clarity's sake. Spoiler alert. Again, if you haven't watched the movie, step away from the podcast and come back at a later date. But what we are sort of hinting at is the whole quote unquote twist, if you will, about Maxine's father. And what I meant is at the end of the first film, he's teased out, or not even teased out, but we keep seeing this uh, evangelist preacher on the TV, and it's revealed at the end of X that it's in fact Maxine's father. So everything comes full circle, and again, we'll get into more of like the details, but he's sort of behind this whole episode, and it just it felt a little. I'm sure I'm going to get flack for this. It felt a little Scream 3 to
I
me.
would, so can I interject for
Yeah,
a
go
second?
right like ahead. Yeah.
I wanted to say a few things, if I may. Scream 3 is exactly what I thought of, but I also thought of Halloween Ends. I feel like this is just you group these three films together, and they're the divisive third and final installment of a trilogy that was, for the most part, well received until this one. 100% agree with you. The Scream 3 parallel in particular is very apt with when you find out Roman was really the mastermind behind all three movies and the familial relation. Like, that's exactly what I thought of watching this film. You make it. I want to concur with what you said. This is very Brian De Palma-esque. It's very giallo Italian film. And that those genres are not for everyone. I do not like a lot of those 80s thrillers because a lot of them are hokey. Like, a lot of them were made very hokey, and in retrospect, they're even more hokey watching them now. Whereas X was a grindhouse film, slasher film in the vein of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Pearl was very whimsical, Wizard of Ozzy type psychological horror. This was a completely different beast. And I feel that your opinions on the type of film it was trying to emulate will go a long way into how you feel about this movie in general. Let me just so our co-host Chris Evans, DC Unlimited, Gathering of the Geeks, he said he felt it was more style over substance. I don't know if I would 100% go that far. I think Ty West was very much trying to make a movie that could have been released in the 80s. I think it's the same thing he did with X and Pearl. It's just a different genre. And your tolerance for that genre will feed into your like for this movie. At least I think. I did want to mention one other friend we have. So our friend Cookie actually, one of her criticisms of this film actually was, so she found X very funny in a way that Ty West was trying to make this 80-year-old couple intimidating and scary and like threatening when in reality, you push them over. She breaks her hip. They take themselves out at the end of that movie, right? But she said the difference between that and MaXXXine, she felt like while she felt that way about X, she felt Ty West was playing it dead serious. Where she felt MaXXXine, he was almost like making in on the joke and making fun of it in the end with the preacher and how over the top and campy he was. And I thought that was an interesting point. And I don't disagree with her on that because the preacher, the televangelist, is definitely my biggest problem with this film.
Yeah, I would co-sign that because while I'm a big fan of the style of this film, the look of it, it does feel like a film that if you were going through a video store counter back in the late early 90s, even late 80s, you could find a film like MaXXXine just from the way it is shot, the story choices that are made. I mean, cinematography it's that is a consistency throughout all of these films. They're beautifully shot and they work
Beautiful.
within their specific time period. So this felt very 80s. The 80s is such a cool decade in a lot of ways, just in terms of cinema. I mean, you can really pick any moment and you can tell any great story, but that's an aside for another day. Um, no, so looking at the look of the film, I think is beautiful. The sort of aesthetic and the choices of again Brian De Palma, sort of those sort of uh, you know upgraded B movies in a way, but again, kind of putting that emphasis on the style and the flashiness like that's cool. I think that is very interesting. But that's a perfect point about it almost becoming a joke of itself because say what you will about 80-year-old Pearl in the first film or even the younger version of herself in the prequel slash sequel, that is all played serious. There's no wink and nod at the camera. And again, this is where the Scream three vibe comes in, which again, full disclosure, buddy, I like Scream 3. This is not a Scream 3 bash, so put down your virtual
My man.
pitchforks. But there is a tonal shift in Scream 3, just as I think there is a tonal shift in this film, where in a lot of ways this movie is trying to be two different films. Like it's trying to be sort of a back corner video store movie from the 80s with all of the trappings and aesthetics, but yet at the same time it's almost, I don't want to say it becomes campy at the end, but it's definitely flirting with those elements. And
I
again,
would
maybe it's because it's a preacher, and so that automatically kind of makes it more ridiculous than it needs to be. Like that doesn't necessarily bother me, because like you can make an interesting element with the religious angle, because that's a theme that's running throughout the other two films. I think it's the fact that okay, it's the dad, and like
but
it's
see that
just it's so over the top in a lot of ways, where it's like, oh, okay, like you know he's hamming it up in a way that is in contradiction to the way everybody else is playing in the film. Like just put him next to Kevin Bacon just for a minute, who I think frankly steals the show nearly in this film. Like his character is outrageous. He's like this private detective who, I mean, frankly, this film wears its influences beautifully on its sleeves. Like, I mean,
yep.
there's a lot of Chinatown references. The look of Kevin Bacon's character from, he gets injured, so he has like the band-aid over his nose. So it looks like Jack Nicholson's character in Chinatown. I mean, right down to the hat. He's wearing the beige suit. I mean, it's again right on the money with what Ty West was going for. But like that character is outrageous, but yet it's grounded. He's grounded enough that you buy into it. Whereas like the dad, and again, maybe it's the fact that he's the preacher. He just sort of sticks out like a sore thumb, and it's in such contradiction to everything else, certainly in the other films, but more importantly, what we see in the first two acts, where there is a seriousness to it. There, even though it is sort of, you know, throwbacks to De Palma or whatnot, there's still that element of suspense and menace that's peppered throughout. Then it's like, okay, we take this right turn down into almost Campyville.
I don't think the problem is the preacher. So I think that was a natural step to go to finish off the trilogy. You knew from X she had a estranged relationship with her dad, and that he was on TV praying she found her way home because Hollywood and the adult industry and the sins of the time stole her away. And I think televangelists in general are very creepy in real life. Like you see the more culty, devout ones, they're terrifying. And if he had played it like that, it would have worked a lot better for me. But he didn't. He went so over the top, so hammy. I was laughing at the movie, not with the movie. And so I have a few problems with it. With one, his plan made no sense because he's out there protesting movies, but he's making his own movie. Like it made no sense. Exorcisms, like that when he started talking rambling about exorcisms, I was like, this is going into really weird territory now. I think a much better plot line would have you could have still used the dad as a villain, but maybe he was sent Kevin Bacon out to bring MaXXXine home against her will. And that would have been grounded. That would have been believable. That would have stayed with the plot of the dad being the villain. That would have stayed within the tone of the other two movies. And I think it would have worked a lot better rather than the showdown at what is essentially Roman's mansion from Scream 3, where there's a big shootout with two over-the-top detectives who I actually liked, Bobby Cannavale and Michelle Monaghan. But yeah, and speaking of that shootout, can I go into one of my other issues with this film? And it is not just prevalent in the third act, but throughout the movie. As much as I liked the first two acts, Maxine is a bystander to much of what's going around her. She does not take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and decide her own fate. She has other people deal with the issues in her life rather than dealing with it herself. She has her sleazy agent deal with Kevin Bacon. the two cops essentially take out her dad. She may get the final kill, but they're the ones who incapacitate her and save her from the cult. And she has her friend in the video store doing research on the videotape for her and everything like that. She really has no agency of her own. And that is such a big contradiction to me from X, where they really set her up as this tough as nails. I will do anything to achieve stardom. And you would almost expect that character trait. She would have no problem getting her hands dirty and killing Kevin Bacon or finding a way to get out of this cult situation herself. Because I thought that was the whole point of her character that they set up in X, that I will lie, steal, cheat, and kill to achieve the fame I want and think I deserve. And she doesn't. She's very passive this whole movie. Now, don't get me wrong, she has two very badass moments. The scene in the alleyway, which was phenomenal and made me cross my legs in the theater. And then we had when she beat the crap out of Kevin Bacon in the car. But apart from those two moments, yeah, she talked like tough bad A. I don't know if we can curse on here, say badass, but she talked like a badass, but she really didn't act like a badass. And I don't know if that was just me who felt that way, if you felt that way, or
No, I mean, I was going to try to like, find more positives, but like you're just like reminding me things that just really bothered me with this film. No, there's such a deviation from the character we see in the first film to where she is now. And this is where I think there is the downside to Pearl. And again, I say this is the biggest defender and fan of that film.
you too.
We never got a middle act with this character. We see Maxine in X. We watch the events unfold. She manages to get away. So we've seen one point, but this is what, like 5, 6 years or so after that film,
That was
or after that.
79. This is 85, so 6 years. Yep.
Yeah, so 6 years, and we get a little bit of that, but we're sort of missing that next step, and so it does sort of feel in a way like an incomplete story because we don't get to see her go through another trial by fire, sort of what brings Maxine to this point. And you're right on the money. She's very much passive in this film, which is complete contradiction to the character that we had in the first film. Now, I could understand if they were going to make that as a story choice, like, okay, she's traumatized from the events of the first film, but like
Bingo.
there was none of that. There was no like
Well, that
go.
that's one of my. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No, no.
you hit the nail on the head. I wanted to get to that real quick. The trauma. They touch on it. They have that wonderful scene where she's in the confined makeup. Very meta, honestly, because that's what she had to go through to become old lady Pearl in real life. But she's confined in the makeup and she just starts having these flashbacks to the events of X, of Pearl telling her you'll end up just like me, of her
Yeah.
shooting her, running over her, touching her, and she freaks out. And that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie because I'm like, that's why I wanted more of, to see her grappling with what she went through.
Bingo.
And we
Bingo.
got none of, like, they toyed with it in maybe like two scenes, and then it just amounted to nothing and fell to the wayside. And I felt that was a huge missed opportunity because not only does it do a disservice to Maxine, but chronologically, the first film in this trilogy is called Pearl,
Right.
and they don't. It would have paid her that character more respect if they had leaned more into Maxine being so traumatized by her interaction with Pearl.
That was another thing where I thought, okay, there's so much build up to Pearl. I really thought we would have much more of the psychological hangover into this film. And as you said, we dance around it. We don't really open that door fully and explore it to where I think you could have had some interesting story choices. I mean, again, not to go back on the Scream 3 angle or even, Halloween Ends, but there are choices in those two films that coincide with where the characters of, say, Sydney for Scream and Laurie for Halloween have been. Not saying everybody always will agree with them, because certainly there are the critics, but we can understand as an audience where they have been. We've watched the journey, and so where Sydney is in Scream 3 as a recluse, and where Laurie is in Halloween Ends as someone trying to put her life back together, it makes sense because we've watched the journey unfold. And we don't have that with MaXXXine. We have the first outing, which is bloody, it's spectacular, but that's just one outing. And in this film, we needed more of that. We needed to see who has this character become, why, well, we know why she is this way, but what are the effects of that? What's going through her mind? And again, I mean, okay, it's a story choice. They didn't want to do it, but it kind of at what cost? Like, I mean, that to me, I think would have made everything tie together. I mean, I could probably, get
Well,
more on board with the father angle if we had at least more of a rounded character development with Maxine, because I mean, otherwise we're just sort of watching her, passively react to events instead of how she is in the first film, actively engaging with them. Now, I mean, some people may come at me and say, well, look, she's just dealing with her trauma, but you got to give me more than
we
that. You got to
we needed
you got to show more than just, oh well, it all happened off screen. Sorry, no, we got to have more than that,
well,
particularly when there's no
exactly.
second film.
We needed more than that one line her Giancarlo Esposito had of "I found you on the streets and made you into somebody."
Yeah,
Give me that movie. She was
ex-
living on the streets, clearly going through a rough time, and she then became this famous adult film star. Give me that movie. And like, who knows? Is that going to be the fourth movie? Is he going back in time? Who knows?
yes,
Because we
possibly. Yeah.
know there's an idea for a fourth movie. But I just want to cut off a line of attack some of the naysayers may give us here with what you said. That we needed more in between this movie and X. And I agree with you fully. Now I could see somebody out there being like, well, Phil, we got nothing between the end of Pearl and X, like to see, how she roped Howard into it and like they became these like professional killers. But guess what? It worked fine as it is because both of those films had a Pearl did a good enough job by the end of that film showing us who she is and where she is at the end of that film that you can believe in X when we meet old lady Pearl that this is a woman who still has her sexual desires and now she does it. She never got her dream life she dreamed of, and she doesn't feel wanted anymore. And you believe why she's doing what she's doing. She found her, I don't know, joy, whatever, wrong
She
word,
found
but
her
she
X factor.
she found her X factor in killing people. And like, so I don't, while I would love a Pearl and Howard movie in between, I don't need it. Like I need a movie between X and Maxine.
I mean, it's a cherry on top because there's enough done with the characters in both X and in Pearl that you understand what's going on. The story takes its time to pay credit and actually stick with them for the sake of development. Whereas in this film, I really felt like we were just checking a box. We're just sort of, all right, we got to get to the next scene. We got to get to the next scene. All right, now we got the big shootout. Like there was, I mean, it's not like this is necessarily a quick movie. It's like, an hour and 40 something minutes, but like, take your time. Like there's
Well, I
no,
felt that was actually a detriment. I felt like I could have used more time to
the,
breathe a little bit.
again, the other two films don't waste a moment, and they fill each even empty second with little character moments or sort of Easter eggs that pay off down the line. There's really none of that in this film. And again, I know I probably sound like I'm really being a nitpicker here, but it's like
So
it's just like
it's
when you've been so high up with the other two films, it's really noticeable when you drop this low with Maxine. Like
well,
the
in a
drop
lot of
off in
ways.
quality, it's like it's all over the place in that sense. I'm not talking about cinematography or sort of the aesthetic, but it's just sort of the forsaking of the characters and story developments. It's just so noticeable. Like Pearl, it's perfectly paced. It has the right amount of balance. Same with X. Everything pays off. Each scene goes to the next. Whereas this is like, all right, event here, watching her on the set. All right, maybe a little bit of trauma, but then we're going to go cut to the Night Stalker stuff. Like it's just, it's all over the map, and
Well,
that's a
so
detriment to the, to what has come before, but sort of the whole set, point of what you're trying to accomplish with a trilogy.
this felt very much like a first draft of a film.
Fair
He could
point.
have done another. He could have done another pass, and because all the elements are there, they just, to your point, aren't developed enough. Like you have the traumatic flashbacks, but you only get a scene of it. It's almost like, oh, there's a note in the script. We have it. Let's expand on that later.
Yeah.
You get her, like the trailers. The trailer had me convinced, oh, she's really suffering from what she went through in X. She's seeing Pearl up in the psycho house, but besides that
Bingo.
one image, that's it. She never sees her again. And the mask, that's it.
Bingo.
Um, so this felt like very much like a first draft, and I actually wonder if the pandemic was a benefit to X and Pearl a bit because they were written and shot and directed during the pandemic, so they had more time to slower develop. They had to be more intimate stories by nature of filming during the pandemic, and therefore more character focused stories. This one tries to do a lot and is so big. I almost feel like if they had to take their time with this one, like they did X and Pearl, or if they had to scale it back by necessity, whether budget or they couldn't shoot for whatever rules were out there, I could think it could have been a little better. Um, Especially on the character angle, like you were saying. So one of the things I noticed regarding the characters, Pearl doesn't have a lot of characters, but the characters in that film, like the projectionist, her cousin, her sister-in-law, her mother, her father, they're all very memorable. You get to spend time with all of them. They are fully developed supporting characters. X, same thing. All the
Hmm.
characters fully developed. You love them, you hate them, whatever the case may
Right.
be.
Right.
Here, it's only MaXXXine and maybe her video store friend. But like the rest, Halsey had one scene before they killed her off. So
Yeah.
why, as an audience member, is that death supposed to mean anything to me when I don't know this character at all? Um, the cops were caricatures, and again, I like
Yeah.
the cop. I love those two actors, and I thought they were funny. But like, apart from Maxine and Kevin Bacon, like the rest were just so paint
Everybody
by
was
number
forgettable.
stereotypes,
Everybody was
and like,
forgettable.
yeah, you didn't care about any of them by the time. So like when they start dying off, it's kind of like, who cares? I
It's
will real quick because we have been being negative. I do want to give a shout out to Elizabeth Debicki, who I thought was one of the highlights of the film as the director
she,
of the Puritan.
she never turns in a bad performance, and I will co-sign that. She was wonderful. That yeah, I will absolutely co-sign that. She's get anything. It was big role, small role. Yeah, she's always gonna bring it. So no, I agree with you on that 1000%. But yeah, no, I guess my biggest thing when I thought about this, and I've had some time to really marinate with this movie, and that's why again I'm really glad that I didn't immediately dive into reactions, because sometimes I think how you think in the moment versus what comes out a few 3 or 4 days later really can make an impact. And I guess my biggest thing, I'm sort of indifferent. It's not like this is a bad film. It's not.
No,
And it's not, I'm not like how some people were with Halloween Ends, where it's like, oh my God, you've ruined Michael Myers for me. Like, it is, I'm not saying like, oh, this now spoils Pearl and X. Oh, that the whole thing is ruined. I mean, I will be very interested to watch all three of these films back to back to back just to see the uh the thread line. But that's really the biggest thing, just indifference on it, because there's a lot of ambition in this film, but it sort of becomes bigger than what they can even manage, and it ultimately goes nowhere. Like when Pearl ends, when MaXXXine ends, they have very visceral and memorable endings. Whether you're watching the end of X and they again starts in the present. We go back with the flashback, and then tie it together at the end with the cops and whatnot finding the film, the camera, and their whole line is like, this looks like a fucking horror movie or something like that.
What do
And
you
of
think's on the
course,
camera? One fucked up horror
yeah,
picture.
that's it. And then of course with Pearl, the iconic ending now of just her staring into the camera, supposedly looking off screen at Howard. I mean, again, those images and those moments stay with you, and they feel like a tremendous payoff. I didn't feel that when this film ended. It just sort of
I'm
like
going to have to respectfully push
that. No,
back.
like I said, go right ahead. That's what I want here.
I
But no, I didn't
I
have it. I was like, oh, okay.
I actually think third act aside, again, I didn't like the third act guys overall. I did adore the ending though. I liked how it was number one, her headless prop was a mirror image of Pearl, the ending of Pearl. Um, but I also liked there's kind of a Pearl wasn't wrong in the end, that Maxine did end up just like her. She did reach the pinnacle of stardom, yes, or we assume she's going to. She did get a role in a movie. We don't know how that turns out. But it's not a happy ending. It's a sad ending because the director, Elizabeth Becky's character, asks her, "What do you plan on doing now that everyone knows your name?" And the final line of the movie, the trilogy, is, "I just never wanted to end." That's what Maxine says. So she's reached this point she's always wanted to reach, but she's not exactly happy about it. It's I think it what they were saying, it's a you almost have to sell your soul to make it in Hollywood, right? And like in a way, Mia Goth was amazing in this film. I mean, she's always amazing. She
Oh
was the
yes.
highlight of this movie.
Yep.
But in a way, the character was very soulless in this movie. It was almost a soulless performance, and I think it was a commentary on how you don't of how the people who reach the pinnacle of fame kind of have to sell their soul. And despite the fact she's made it, she is still depressed, whereas Pearl never made it and she was depressed. There were these two ambitious women who wanted stardom. One made it, one didn't, but the stardom didn't bring her the happiness she was always lacking, I guess. And I loved that. Loved that again. The beheaded prop was the mirror image of Pearl staring at the camera. Doesn't linger long, but I also love that. We get the pan up over the Hollywood Hills, we get Maxine in the hills, and then we pan up to the stars in the sky, which can say a lot about that as well, right? Like all she wanted to do was be a fucking star. She said it how many times? And yeah, and the song choice, Betty Davis's Eyes, phenomenal song. Love that song. Love the song. And I thought the song choice was perfect. It describes Maxine perfectly. It described the character of Pearl perfectly. And it describes Mia Goth as an actress perfectly. So I don't think they could have picked a better final song to kind of wrap up this trilogy or Maxine and Pearl's story. So the ending actually really did stick with me. And I loved, yeah, it's not the exuberant or jubilant ending we were hoping maybe Maxine would get. But I think it's a fitting ending for her and the trilogy as a whole, and what Ty West is saying about stardom and being famous this whole time. So
Yeah, that'll be something I'll be curious to check out on a rewatch. I think, like I've said, there are elements in this film, the whole exploitive nature of Hollywood. There's definitely seeds of that in this film. I wish we could have gotten a little more fertile ground, if you will, to see where those seeds could grow and develop. But again, it kind of goes back to sort of just my issue with a lot of the story choices overall, where we're never really given enough payoff. There's not enough to justify what is happening. I mean, I'll concede it's beautiful, and again, cinematography wise, again, just the way the camera pulls back, you've got the like again the Hollywood sign, like all of that. I mean, it is eye candy. There's no denying that. It's just I wanted to I couldn't feel what the images were showing me, I guess, and that was something. Whereas with the other two films, I immediately felt something from those two endings. And I think partly because there had been a full and kind of worthwhile journey that we go on with the respective characters.
Well, to your point, I do think that's one of the flaws of this movie. It relies too much on people's feelings for the previous two.
Yeah.
So, which is why I want to ask: did you get a chance to rewatch Pearl and X right before this one?
So I rewatched part of X. I didn't get a chance to finish it, but I have recently rewatched Pearl, a couple of weeks before this film. And so Pearl, again, I've been no surprise, everybody. That's my favorite film of the trilogy, and we'll get into rankings and whatnot. But uh, Pearl was very much on my mind going into this film, and so like again, I can sort of I suppose check a lot of some of these criticisms could be just my feelings towards that film and my reaction to that film definitely weighed heavily, and again, this is just speaking for me personally. I really felt when I was watching this film, I wanted to see more of Pearl. I wanted to see that world continue. And I think that's again that's just something, my own bias because Pearl just again some films just resonate in ways you may not expect. And I never would have thought like a prequel would have had that kind of a connection, if you will, would have been more interesting since we kind of know where the story goes. But I mean that's sort of the beauty of filmmaking. You never know what's going to happen. And I kept, in the back of my mind, I'm like, wow, what could Pearl be up to, in another, 40 years beforehand, kind of a situation. There's, I know, I kept thinking like, boy, I'd love to go back and see where the story threads could go after that film, and maybe it's because we sort of we're lacking a lot of uh new slasher villains in today's horror movies. I mean, there's certainly obviously exceptions. Terror Art the Clown would certainly fall into that
That
category.
I was about to, I was about to say.
I was just oh no I covered the bases. But like there's very few, and Pearl, while she's not necessarily in that wheelhouse, if you will, of like a Art the Clown or Michael or Freddy, she is something in her own right. And I think the fact that it's a female slasher, if you will, is kind of a unique twist because we don't normally see that. And
Well,
that is something, if they announce tomorrow the fourth film is, more of the adventures of Pearl and Howard in the 1920s or early 1930s, I mean, I'll be there opening night.
so funny you say Pearl's in her own right. I love the fact that she's a female slasher, one of the only female slashers,
Yeah.
and maybe controversial opinion, but she would be on my Mount Rushmore of slashers at Ghostface and Michael Myers and Art the Clown. It would be the three of them and Pearl. So that's how
Ooh,
much I love
I
the
like
character of
that. I
Pearl.
like that.
And that goes to what I actually a little anecdote I wanted to tell here for a second. So when I first saw Pearl, so I when I saw X in theaters, I went completely blind. All I knew was a horror movie getting good reviews, and I fell in love with that film. So I was eagerly anticipating Pearl, and when I saw Pearl, it was an expectations game because I was expecting more of X. And when I saw it, I was like, "It's cool. Like, it wasn't what I was expecting. But that was good. Like, but X is way better." And I was shocked to see the discourse online, like from you and Chris and Cookie and all the all our mutuals on Twitter, uh, you know, Nico and Zeddy and all these people are saying Pearl is a masterpiece. I'm like, they saw a different movie. I don't know what they saw that I didn't, but when I saw it again, I was like, yes, okay, I totally get it now. So I think an X that, and it happens with everything. It's going to happen with Long Legs and Nosferatu and Superman and all these movies we're looking forward to because we can't help but build up expectations based on the trailers and the promotional shots and everything leading up to it. So again, I don't want to blame everyone's expectation game on why they don't like MaXXXine, but I think expectations can harm a first viewing for anyone. Happens to me all the time. Which is why I'm very curious to see what you think of it when you rewatch it again at home, especially if you get a chance to watch Pearl, X, and this back to back, because I did watch these three. I saw the re-releases of X and Pearl in theaters, and they were one after the other, one week, the next week, and the next week. And I think it definitely enhanced my viewing experience because it is one story. It's one coherent story to me. And it really, now, it's a fault of this movie. This movie doesn't rely, can't stand on its own as much as the other two. But it does, I will say, it definitely plays better watching it right after the other two because you get, the ending will resonate with you more, I
Mm-hmm.
think, and work better. And I'm very curious to see what you do, how you feel when you watch the three back to back.
No, that's going to be an interesting experiment because, like I said, I went into this film. I really wanted to come out and be like, you know, damn, that was a great movie. I mean, I knew nothing was going to top Pearl. Like that's right up there on Mount Rushmore. Like
Mhm.
it's perfection.
Mhm.
But I was like, you know what, it maybe maybe it's going to top X. Like it's this is going to be different. And obviously it wasn't that. It didn't hit that level for me. But I'm not one of these people that's be like, oh well, I can't watch that piece of crap again. Like no, like I want to see it different. I want to see it with some perspective. And again, I think this is not just a one-off. This is part of a trilogy. This is the third film and supposedly final entry. So I do want to see how X ties to Pearl, how Pearl ties to this, and all the way around. So no, I will definitely revisit it because I mean, just as an aside, I love horror films, everybody. Everyone, if you've listened to this show, that's these are like my bread and butter. And so the fact that we got a trilogy, a horror film trilogy,
Mhm.
again, to quote Randy from Scream, it's a rarity in the horror genre, folks. And so, like to me, I'm just glad these films exist on the one hand because while I have issues, particularly with this one, there's no denying the love and effort that Ty West has for the genre.
And
And
Mega.
oh, absolutely. I mean, this it's a team effort in a lot of ways. Like this was not a let's phone it in. Like there's love and blood and sweat and tears with all of these films and most certainly with this film, of course. So I look at them, of course, with a bit of a soft spot still because I love these kind of movies. I'm a horror buff. I mean, and I know you are as well.
And that's what I was going to say too. Like online discourse can be very hyperbolic one way or the other. There's not a lot of middle ground. So I think one of the things that shocked me about, and I don't know why I'm shocked because online is going to online, Twitter is going to Twitter. But one of the things that shocked me about the people who didn't like this movie on Twitter is calling it it's not a bad movie in my opinion. It's worse than the other two, but it is not a bad movie. Number one, and number two, and I say this as a horror fan who acknowledges we are living in the second golden age of horror after the 80s. Even by horror movie standards, it is not a bad horror movie. It's just we were so spoiled with Pearl and X, we expected something of that caliber. But it is still better than so much that comes out in the genre and out of it. And I hope upon a rewatch, people will revisit this and re-examine it when it hits VOD through different eyes, and at least come to realize that, even if you don't rank it as highly as Pearl and X, which I certainly don't. Spoiler alert. Uh, but I feel like I have also been quite negative this review. Can I talk about some of the things I actually really loved about this movie?
No, please do. Like I said, I really thought this would be, me on one side of the fence and you on the other, but maybe I'm just, sort of, I've tainted the water or something.
No, no,
No,
no, no.
please.
That's
Oh,
just how
no.
I.
No,
Yeah.
go off.
So I guess this is both a positive and a negative. I loved the opening. Mia Goth's Maxine's dialogue, monologue for the filmmakers, where she's talking about the devil inside of her and how it's poisoning her and darkening her feelings. I was like, because it was a great monologue. Mia Goth is spectacular, but also like in the context of the broader trilogy, you're like, oh, it's like she's also fucking describing herself. She's talking about what her the trauma she experienced in Pearl. She's living with that. Pearl is haunting her. And of course, they don't expound upon that later on, but like the beginning, like off to a grand start. And Ty West and his humor, I mean, this whole trilogy is about sex. She brings out the tears and everything, and the director and the casting director are so moved, and then she's like, "Do you mind taking off your top so we can see your breasts?" And then again, that whole opening montage that to give me all your loving was perfection. She gets in the car with the MaXXXine license plate and drives off, and we get all the 80s newsreels and clips. Like, I was in. I was like, this is a fantastic opening to the movie. So I love the opening.
And I would co-sign that. Like I said, the the trappings of this film, the 80s aesthetic, it's right on point. I mean, sometimes films that are set during that decade can go a little overboard sometimes, where it's
Yes.
almost they're trying to shove it in your face. This is the 80s, Ronald Reagan's over here, and we're going to talk about, this, like, subtlety is key, folks. And that I thought was perfect. I mean, it's clearly the 80s just from the looks, the music, the newsreels, but it's not overdone. Much like with the other two films, we know one is set during the height of the pandemic of 1918. The other one is set in the late 70s, but we're not getting beat over the head with it. And that's something that I really appreciate. Ty West is a smart filmmaker, and he's willing to trust the audience enough, which, so again, in unskilled hands, they'd be like, all right, just cram all the 80s references and the big hair and the shoulder pads, and we'll have a great time. Like, there's none of that. Like, it's subtle enough, but it's the 80s. It's there. It's right from that opening with her driving off in the car. It's like, okay, this feels like a movie from that time. And that's, again, one of the things that I
And
really do enjoy about the film. It does feel like this could have been shot 40 years ago. Like, it was
well,
discovered in a lost vault somewhere.
100%. And what I loved is because we're inundated with 80s content nowadays. People have such a nostalgia for it. It's been like 50 years at this point,
Thank you,
guys. Like,
Stranger Things.
yeah. But what I love is Ty West leaned into the seedier, darker, grittier side of the 80s instead of the bright 80s we're used to seeing in everything else we get
That was
nowadays.
a perfect touch. I mean, and that fits with the film, with the other two films, where there's that dirty lens aesthetic, which, again, I so appreciate, because he has a way of sort of inverting what we might remember either through nostalgia, or what we look at through history books, or documentaries, and he finds a way of making it dirtier, in both a literal and physical sense, metaphysical sense. And that's right here in this film. This is not glitzy 80s Hollywood. This is the seedy underbelly, dark side. And that is, I mean, that's a chef's kiss right there. And I like that we're leaning into that, because you're right. So many films and even TV shows that are set during this decade, they tend to gloss over and make it, oh, everything was all sunshine and happy talk, and morning in America type uh mentality. And again, not to say it was or it wasn't, but it's important to show sort of the other side, if you will. And that's clearly there from the very opening. Again, that monologue, and then, of course, where she has to she has to take her time. It's like, okay, we're going full full throttle here. This is not the sunshine of Hollywood, California, here I come kind of a thing.
Well, I loved also as well just how clever like some of the like the background stuff was like X Factor looking for your X Factor,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
she works at a strip club called the Landing Strip right by an airport with the plane coming over. Like, love those touches. Loved all the callbacks to X and Pearl, like
yeah,
her putting out her cigarette on Data's star in the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and obviously that's the actress that Pearl named her Gator after. Like, little
yeah.
things like that, I loved. Loved. We found out Pearl and Howard's last name was apparently Douglas. Who knew? Um,
Not sure
I
I need to know
love
that, but yeah, no.
I I I really liked, even if Maxine was a passive bystander for the majority of the movie, in my mind, that they made her out, they at least tried to make her out to be tough as nails. Like she wasn't afraid of the Night Stalker.
Right,
She did have those two really badass moments where she really injured the guy in the alley and then really injured Kevin Bacon. Like those are cheer-worthy moments. Those are Maxine Minx moments, and I
right.
was happy for those. Um, the toughest, oh, the Night Stalker. I'm glad.
I was going to say, what did you think of that inclusion? Because that was certainly, even when the trailer dropped, I remember there was a little bit of, I don't want to say backlash, but some discussion of like, okay, why are we including this angle? Is that going to fit? Is there like some twist with the story? Or I remember some people think I was, was Maxine the Night Stalker? Like there was a lot of that
So
speculation.
I'm glad they didn't rewrite actual morbid history with the Night Stalker.
Yeah.
I'm glad they didn't have it end up being Maxine versus the Night Stalker or anything. Like, don't idolize these guys. Don't fictionalize real
No.
horrors like that. Um, I mean, I guess he was. I mean, the whole Night Stalker thing was put in there to really help set the tone for like what kind of this era of the 80s, this darker, dangerous era of the 80s, specifically Hollywood at the time. But I don't think it needed to be there. I think it would have even worked better had we only focused on Maxine's father as a killer and the cops not saying, "Oh, is this the Night Stalker or not?" Like, is this a copycat? Like, count all that out. Like, just focus on this new murderer.
That was the thing. That's where I started to say, okay, it's a little too on the nose. Like, I get it, trying to set the tone, trying to set the era in its perspective, but it was one of those story elements where I thought, okay, it doesn't go anywhere. Like, this is not, Maxine versus the Night Stalker, which it didn't need to be, and it shouldn't have been. But it was one of those elements where it's just sort of there almost as background noise and there to sort of provide red herrings, but it's not anything that really adds anything kind of in a plus or minus way to the story. It's just sort of there.
Absolutely. I don't know if I was muted or not. Absolutely. Um, like I would have been fine if they just mentioned it once during that opening montage of the 80s and then never mentioned him again. But
Right.
it is what
No.
it is.
Yeah.
Um, like I mentioned before, I loved Elizabeth Debicki's character. I loved all the monologuing she did about Hollywood tends to chew people up and spit them out.
Mm.
And, if you make it to the top and miss your chance, like don't cling to that fame, they'll forget about you by the next week. Like Ty West has some really interesting, over the course of the three films, ideas, or he doesn't seem like the biggest fan of Hollywood in general.
Oh no, he's definitely critical. And again, there's moments of it in X and Pearl, but it's on full display in MaXXXine. This is not a love letter to Hollywood by any stretch of the imagination. This is almost like a Byrne letter in a lot of ways, or a Dear John letter. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that in the themes, which again, from that, I really dig. I wish we could have gone more with that angle because, I mean, not to go on the Scream 3 comparison again, but there's sort of a commentary in that film about the exploitive nature of Hollywood and kind of, who is the real villain in that particular movie. And some people might say it was
Milton.
yeah, Milton, the producer. And so that is something that I really wish they would have stuck with more in this film because there's a lot of material and they could have gone in a myriad of directions. And I felt they just sort of just cracked the tip of the iceberg and decided, well, we'll just sort of leave it over there on the shelf. And I was really hoping that would become a whole new vein of exploration because, like I said, there's elements of fame and stardom and sort of the critiques of it throughout the other two films. It really felt like the next logical step to just sort of tear Hollywood a new one in this particular one, and it just sort of it dances around it enough, and then sort of just again, I won't go back on the whole rehashing of the third act, but then it just sort of goes into that territory. But I mean, that's something that I think Scream 3 really hit out of the park with its whole critique, if you will, on fame and the Hollywood system.
So, 100% agree with you about Scream 3. But you want my hot take here? Because
Yeah,
we
go
keep
ahead.
mentioning making the Scream 3 comparison, specifically to the third act. Here's my hot take. This preacher televangelist MaXXXine has nothing on Roman. He made Roman seem like a played straight, the like honestly, no joking aside, and I don't want to get into a Scream tangent. You just did your Scream episode, but I know a lot of people hate that ending of Scream 3, and I certainly have my problems with it too. But I think they did the reveal and the connection between Roman and Sydney better than the televangelist and MaXXXine here. And that's despite the fact this movie had the benefit that X set up the televangelist, which Scream 3 didn't have with
Yeah.
either. I'll go a step further and say the televangelist here is more akin to Dermot Mulroney in Scream 6, just so unhinged and over the top, it took me out of the climax.
Bingo. No, that's a perfect comparison. It's so hammy, and it just yeah, it does. It takes you out of the film. You're no longer watching what we've seen for an hour and 20 odd minutes of a kind of a gritty, sleazy 80s film. It's like now we're almost into, you know, local community theater or something, which again, no knock to the, anyone who's a fan of community theater, but it's just it's over it's unnecessarily over the top.
And yeah, and again, so my second time watching it, I was trying to think like if he played it more straight, like if he went more Laurie Metcalf in Scream 2 than Dermot
Right.
Mulroney in Scream 6, would it have been better? And I think it definitely would have worked better had he toned it back. I still don't think the motivation made much sense and his idea
No.
of making a film, but I think it would have I and a lot of other people I think would have probably stomached it more if he played it more straight
A little more
rather
restrained.
yeah. And I yeah, and I get it. Ty West was going for something. He was really trying to lean into that Giallo, Brian De Palma 80s erotic thriller, but he not to go back to what we talked about at the beginning, he maybe stretched it a little too far. And like
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
Pearl and Howard, he played deadly serious, even if we found it funny that 280-year-olds were committing all these murders. Here, it's almost like he was made it a parody rather than satire.
Yeah, it really does become a parody of itself, and it does it took me out of the film to the point where I'm like, okay, this is just silliness. But I'll be curious how I feel after a rewatch if it still is abrasive, because it is something that just it does suck the oxygen out of the room in the worst possible way.
I'll say two times watching it, that was still my biggest
Okay,
with the
so
movie. But
if that's for you, I can tell you, I my opinion won't change.
um another thing, and we only touched on briefly, and I'm sorry if I'm like going on and
No,
on,
go
but
right ahead. Don't.
Kevin Bacon, you commented how he
Yeah.
almost steals the show. I would agree with you. I loved every scene he was in, every single one. Loved his death scene.
Oh,
Loved basically a monologue because Maxine was barely talking with her in the hotel, where he's going on and on about his powerful employer, and that was so he was phenomenal.
he's always great. I mean, I love it too when actors who started in the genre returned to the genre. And again,
Mhm.
all you astute listeners will know Kevin Bacon got his start in the original classic Friday the 13th. So
Starring
everything
one of horror history's only other female slashers.
bingo, that's right, Mrs. Voorhees, that's right. No, so everything does come full circle. But I just as an aside, I mean, I love it when actors who have been away from horror films for a while make their return. I mean, certainly Jamie Lee
As
Curtis has done that, but it's a nice little. Again, I'm not expecting like necessarily all general audience like, oh, Kevin Bacon, he was in Friday the 13th and whatnot. But like again, fans of the genre can really appreciate when
Well,
when somebody who got their start, that's weird. Uh Pennywise the clown or something. I don't know what that was, but yeah, so any event, I just that's just an aside. I really enjoy when an actor returns.
Yeah, and I love when an actor like Jamie Lee Curtis and Kevin Bacon like don't think now that they've made it in our A-list that horror is beneath them. They still
Bingo.
appreciate horror as a genre and its importance. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
Kevin Bacon is great.
he's great in the film.
I wanted to ask you, what did you feel about his chase of MaXXXine through the backlot? Because I know our buddy Chris thought it was almost Looney Tunes, like he didn't like it. And I could see where he was coming from, but at the same time, I enjoyed it. I even liked how it started out as like a showdown in the Old West, like with the two of them on opposite sides of the street on the
Is it,
Western set.
see that see that didn't bother me, which is kind of weird because that that felt right on the nose because they're in a backlot, they're on a studio. It makes sense that you'd want to lean into the trappings, play up your setting, if you will. That didn't feel like it was teetering into to either camp or into sort of absurd satire. Like that felt to me perfectly balanced. Whereas again, like in other films, like in X or Pearl, there are moments that feel either like a reference to Psycho or even Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And so that to me, like that first moment, it feels like high noon in a lot of ways. And it's in keeping in sort of the thread of movies are embedded in these three films. I mean, there's sort of
Mhm.
if anything, these films are a love letter not just to horror films but to the movies themselves, cinema. And so that to me is perfect. And so again, the film is set in Hollywood. She's working as an actress. I would expect them to sort of play up the trappings, if you will. So that no, that didn't bother me. I thought that was fun. I thought that was kind of a again, not to go on the Scream 3, but it did sort of remind me of that scene where Sydney is being
The
chased
Woodsboro
through.
set.
Yeah, which I thought again, just sort of again, those kind of moments are always cool. Not that it's the same in any comparison, but just sort of, you know, I love it when a character is on a movie set and they're running through a world, but it's a fake world, and sort of the
Mhm.
outside, the real world, if you will, was sort of coming in on the on the phony or on the fictitious world. I think those are always kind of fun meta references or commentaries, if you will. Sidebar. I did not expect this to be like a Scream 3, love, but here we go. Maxine's
I've got
making me feel all these different things for Scream 3
I am glad you brought up Psycho because I love that scene
with the
where
house.
Elizabeth Debicki takes her to the house
Yeah.
and is talking about how, America wasn't ready, prudish America wasn't ready for the old lady serial killer twist at the end of Psycho. And again, harkens back to X. The old lady's the one killing all these people, kidnapping all these men to basically be freaking sex slaves. And I love there's one moment we get to see Pearl. She's up in the window of the house, which I thought was a beautiful shot, like
Was a nice
chef's
note.
kiss.
That was nice. The fact they got
Um,
to use the Psycho house is even cooler.
Especially since Ty West said he wrote it, not even thinking he'd be allowed to use the
Yeah.
Sacred House, and then they're like, "Sure, go for
Yeah.
it."
Now again,
um,
I love those kind of in movie references. Again, especially since this film does wear its references and homages on its sleeve. And again, I don't mean that as a negative. It embraces all of the love for movies, whether it is like I said, the kind of callback to High Noon or some kind of a Western, or whether you've got the Psycho house. Again, those are cool, and I can really appreciate those as a film buff.
the only other thing I really wanted to touch on was Lily Collins. I felt like she was wasted. Her one
Uh,
scene, she was great, but she was wasted.
Again, that goes back to my big issue with the film overall is just it wastes its characters. Whereas again, X and Pearl, granted, well, I mean, this cast is no bigger in many ways. I mean, Pearl is certainly the smallest because of the limited number of players, but I mean, X is a pretty big ensemble, and yet it felt like everybody got their due, and nobody felt they were just. I never felt like they were just cannon fodder, if you will.
Right.
Whereas this just felt like this character has to die. This like it just there was no investment. I couldn't react. I couldn't care enough, which again, I think that is a detriment to the film overall, that it doesn't take its time to develop these characters fully. And again, even Maxine to a degree, again, she's just sort of, you know, a wallflower in a lot of ways. And again, it's such a letdown from what we've seen in the previous two.
And it's weird to me too, because the cast involved with this film are pretty big names. Like, if you
It's
needed any evidence that X and Pearl were hits and resonated with audiences, it's a talent they got for
again,
this movie. And so it makes
Becky,
it,
Bacon, like I mean, come on, these are not B-list actors, I mean, no
and,
offense to that, B-list actors, but like, I mean, this is a perfect ensemble, and it's just
and
sad. Like again, like the balloons are big. Any
it,
wise must be around. Um, it's like again, I
he's
mean,
wondering when you're going to do an episode on it.
I know that's right. Check the archives. Um, Bill Skarsgård, trying to knock on the door or something. I know, a bit frightening. Um, no, yeah, like again, Lily Collins. I felt like you have her in the film. Why don't you utilize her more? Now, again, I don't know if there was other stuff. Like again, we just see what we see,
Same
but
with Giancarlo Esposito.
yeah, again, you've got established actors, you've got credible actors, you've got good actors, and they're just sort of relegated to stock characters, cardboard cutouts, cliches, what have you, and not given the proper time and development to make an impact. Again, I go back to, Pearl, for example. Her father is sick and infirmed in the entire film. He doesn't speak. He's in a wheelchair. He makes a few grunting sounds. We get reactions from his face. He had more of an impact with no lines of dialogue than many of the characters in this film. And that these are characters with speaking lines. And that's
Mhm.
that's a real detriment, I think. And that's something where again, I don't know if this was just a story choice or things got left on the cutting room floor, but it's it's a shame. It's a real damn shame.
Yes. Again, listeners, I want to say I may have sounded negative this evening, but I really do like. I give this one 4 stars on Letterboxd. I give the other two fives, but I give this one 4 stars. And I just want to paraphrase something. Martin Scorsese is a big fan of Ty West and this trilogy
I was good. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
because he was impressed by how each movie represents a different type of horror related to different eras in American filmmaking, and that the three linked stories set within three different moments of movie culture, reflecting back on the greater culture. By smuggling thoroughly modern ideas into films that were also steeped in the aesthetics of the past, West has done something bold and thoroughly cinematic. And you can't get any higher praise than that. And I just,
Marty knows. Marty
Mart,
knows.
Marty knows. And I think that's, if I could leave one impression with listeners who may not have been high on this movie or maybe just haven't even seen it, I just want to say to them, I would urge you when it hits video on demand or streaming or Blu-ray to watch it in proper content. Watch the three films back to back because it really is, not to
This
be
one you do need to
punny,
see. Yeah, you do need to see the other two and to really appreciate it.
but it really is an extraordinary trilogy that Ty West put together. And it is truly amazing. He took three different eras and made three unique films, but one connected overarching story. And whether or not this film works on its own as well as the other two did, I think as a whole trilogy, it works as one overarching story. And yeah, so I would just urge listeners to kind of go back and watch the three back to back.
No, I mean when you have Martin Scorsese, one of the greatest living directors of all time, praising your films and not just giving sort of off, the cuff compliments, but really digging down into the weeds, so to speak, that does speak volumes for what has been created here. And Ty West, Mia Goth, they have a lot to be proud of because certainly I'm not as high on this film as the other two. I can't deny that it's still a well-made film, and there's a lot in here to enjoy, which is not something you can say with all third entries in a trilogy. They definitely, I mean, they take some choices here. There's some risks, but you know what? There's it may not stick the landing for me, but the the plane did touch the ground, is what I will say. You know, I mean, it may not have been smooth flying, but it does. We do land. We do
And
land.
and for all the issues there are with this movie, and again, there are issues with this movie, none of them for me stem from Mia Goth or her performance. She
No,
gives an incredible performance. She is, I think, one of the best actresses working in Hollywood right now. I can't wait to see where her career goes. And I love that she has expressed interest in returning as well if Ty West has ideas for a fourth film. Like, so I hope that means she won't forget her roots years down the line either. Um, I did want to ask you though,
yeah.
fourth film, what would you like to see? Because Cookie embedded it in my head. Give us Christmas with Pearl in the 50s or something. And now, if I don't get that, I riot.
Honestly, I hope we see more of Pearl. I really think the the sequel prequel cemented Pearl as one of the great movie villains, certainly a slasher. There's a lot of time between 1918 and whatever it is, 1978,
78.
1979 of X. So you've got a good stretch of time to show what Pearl and Howard are up to on the farm. So if I had my choice, absolutely, I'd want to see and the further quote unquote adventures, if you will, of Pearl and Howard, because I think there's a lot of story you could tell there. And again, it's a whole lifetime of of two characters because we see, I mean, we really don't see Howard in Pearl other than through some flashbacks and his appearance at the very end where he comes back to the bloody homestead. But of course, in X, they're an older couple, so you've got about 50 something years, 60 something years where you could do a lot of interesting twists and turns and again, different time periods, whether it would be the 30s or the Depression or the Roaring 20s or the 40s with World War II or
The
even
50s, like
the Red
Greece.
Scare, you know, something in the 50s or the beginning of the, you know, sort of the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s. I mean, there's a lot of errors, if you will, that could be explored and exploited for Pearl and Howard. So I would definitely advocate for that. What about you?
I agree. I mean, I biased. I love the idea of a Christmas horror movie.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Especially if you take that colorful whimsy of Pearl, like I think that would fit in so like the Technicolor world
Mm,
of Pearl, where
yeah.
there's something so. I think Chris was saying it when we talked to him last for DC Unlimited. There's something the dichotomy of the darkness of a horror movie with the bright lights of Christmas. There's something that works and makes those movies
And you don't get a lot
really,
of them. You really
yeah.
don't get a lot of them.
And I think if you took that vivid Wizard of Oz Technicolor of Pearl, put it in the 40s or 50s and make set it at Christmas, like even just if it's background, like you have a tree in the background, snow on the ground, whatever.
Yeah.
I think you that could be, yeah, it's aesthetically different, but I think it would be very cool, especially because like Pearl wanted to go on that tour around
Around
Christmas with the
that's
church
right. That's
singing,
right.
so she might not like the holiday as much as she doesn't like blondes.
No, like I said, I mean, I think there's a lot of for me, like as I said, I kept thinking I want to see more of Pearl while I was watching this movie. I think I really don't see how there's any way they don't go in that direction, given how
Well,
iconic the second film really has become and sort of cementing uh that
well,
character. And again, it's a hat off to Mia Goth because even though she plays Pearl in both versions, and obviously she plays Maxine, it's it's uncanny. Like it's almost like watching two different people play these roles, and I mean, it's mark of a great actress, to say the least.
Well, yes, I agree with you completely. But as to whether or not they go back, I can see them not, because first of all, this is called the X trilogy.
No, you're fair. That's right.
And second of all, now I know anyone with a premium account can update IMDb and Letterboxd, but there is apparently, and again, biggest pinch grain of salt, a film called Maxine Miller in development, which was her name before she escaped and turned into Maxine Mings. So,
Interesting. Well,
and so I could see them doing that. I really could see them doing that. I could see them doing the lost years between X and Maxine, which might make Maxine better in retrospect. But if I had my preference, I'm with you. Give me Pearl in. I love Pearl in the Red Scare. Actually, that would be
yeah, that
interesting.
it would fit perfectly right here in the
Mhm.
middle of the 1950s. Um, what's your ranking of these three films? I think I have a guess, but I'm just curious.
This
Uh,
was not even hard for me. Pearl X Maxine.
okay.
What about you?
Well, the same, the same. It's
And that's nothing for me about the quality of X, because X and Pearl are like right there with each other, but Pearl just has that extra X factor.
yeah, no,
And
I mean,
there's
certainly for me, I mean, Pearl is like way up there in the clouds, just sort of hovering over everybody. X, I mean, it's a little bit of a drop off, but it's still those are two, I think, instant classics as far as I'm concerned. This one is a little bit lower, closer to earth, shall we say. It doesn't reach the great heights, but I, I will be certain to let you know what my thoughts are upon a rewatch, because this is one that I am very curious about, because the reactions have been varied, to say the least, and there's a lot of
which
passionate opinions on both sides. So it is kind of fun this time to sort of be in a different position, to kind of call back to Halloween Ends, where for a time I felt like I was the only man in the pumpkin patch, and now it does feel like people are slowly coming around to that
that's my
point of.
hope for this movie, because right now that's how I'm feeling on Twitter, despite the good positive reviews. But
No, seriously, and fair enough. This film definitely uh, hit better with critics than Halloween Ends did, so it does have that going for it right off the bat. But we shall see. We shall see. All in good time, as they say. But uh, Anthony, before we close out, any final thoughts on Maxine,
yeah,
or frankly, the whole
so
trilogy as a whole?
Pearl X and Maxine for me is one of the great trilogies, one of my personal favorite trilogies. Maxine sadly fell into the third installment trap that many trilogies fall into, but that's okay. It tried to do a lot. It swung for the fences. It didn't quite hit that home run, but there is enough there that I really enjoyed this movie. And like I said not too long ago, um, I think it is still a great movie and a great horror movie. It's just in the context of the trilogy doesn't live up to the standards of the other two. Um, that said, I'm glad it got made. I'm glad this weird, wonderful, wholly unique story got made. Whether or not we ever get a fourth one, I'm happy we have this, and I can guarantee you, I will be revisiting this whole trilogy, Maxine included, very often over the years, because I truly do love it. I think Ty West and Mia Goth created something. I will avoid the pun and leave that to Phil, but something truly special. And Mia Goth, in particular, created two characters at two different points of their lives who are wholly iconic.
Hmm.
It's interesting to me that, well, it's funny in a way. Like, Mia, all Pearl and Maxine wanted were for the world to know their names, and because of these movies, because of those two characters and those two roles, the world now knows Mia Goth's name. So in a way, the two characters got their stardom in the end. in a roundabout way, and I love that. And yeah, I can't wait to see where Mia Goth and what Mia Goth and Ty West do next, whether in this world or in something different, because I can definitely see them collaborating on other stuff in the future anyway. So
Oh no, I think there's definitely a partnership that has been established through these films. So I'm expecting many more collaborations in the years ahead because clearly they work well together and they do create something extraordinary, which especially in horror films, which you don't always get it right, particularly with a sequel, let alone a trilogy. And my issues and flaws aside with this film, it's damn exciting. And absolute pun intended when I when I say exciting because these are special films, and it's I mean certainly horror's been killing it lately at the box office, but there's box office receipts, but then there's also sort of critical appeal and approval, and not that it's always necessary or sort of mutually exclusive, but these films I think are going to be looked back as the years march on as truly seminal points in the genre and frankly uh defining entries. And I don't not being over the top when I say that I think from
I
X to
think they are
Pearl
modern classics,
they
and they
are
will be
no
considered classics.
bingo because much in the same way we talk about Psycho or Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Halloween or Scream, these three films are going to, I think, stand the test of time. And I'm expecting to see their influences on future entries in other types of horror films down the road, just as Halloween and Scream and Texas Chainsaw Massacre had their influence on any number of films, including, no doubt, what we've seen in these three. But no, I'm glad they exist. I really am glad they exist, and yeah, I'm with you. I can't wait to see what is next for the two of them. I'm curious what Ty West's project is. I'd love to see him get. I'd love to see him take a turn, if you will, in Haddonfield, Illinois. But that's just that's for another
I
discussion.
would love that to see him in Haddonfield or maybe Woodsboro.
Again,
Um,
let him play around with the slasher genre in more explicit terms, if you will.
I one last
Yeah,
thing,
go
and I
ahead.
forgot to bring this up. I did love I mean it's iconic now. It's her catchphrase now. I will not accept a life I do not deserve. I think that's a good motto, and I like at the end she thanks her dad for it. Like you gave me exactly what I needed. And
Divine
that
intervention.
was yeah, and I just loved that, how that tied how that wrapped up, how that was such a core part of her. And in the end, yeah, she hated her dad, but he gave her that divine intervention, that motivation throughout her life to pursue the life she wanted. And I just loved that, how that
It's a
wrapped
great
up.
line.
Yeah,
It's a no it that does pay off very well. I will absolutely concede and co-sign that point because it does it's a line. It's not a throwaway line. It has a lot of weight, and frankly, you can see it in not just X or this one. You can even see it in moments in Pearl. And I don't know
it's
if they
on the sign, and
yeah,
like there's a guy walking around with a placard over him
that's what it is. I was gonna say I don't
that
think anybody
said,
says it, but it's
"Don't
there.
accept a life you don't deserve." Or
Yeah,
yeah,
so it's again this film. Ty West knew what he was doing. I will say that he had a vision, and it he got to execute it. He got to execute that vision, which again is something that is a rarity these days to be able to make three films. And I mean, by all accounts, there was no studio interference with these movies. I mean, maybe there's something going on behind the scenes that, and if there is, and the inside track, let me know and I'll correct the record. But by all accounts, I mean, he got to make the three films that he wanted to make. And that is something as a film connoisseur and a lover of this stuff. I love it when a director can execute a vision and it's their vision and it's not tinkered with oh we got to have this and then studio notes. This is a Ty West film.
I 100% agree. I love when a filmmaker can do that too. And I know we're not talking about it, but that's why. I really appreciate Damien Leone of the Terrifier
Oh, sure,
movies,
absolutely.
because those movies aren't for everyone, but it's his vision. And
Bingo.
after the second one made bank, he was offered from studios to make the third one with some big studios, but he felt they just kind of wanted to take advantage of how iconic the clown had become, and then would meddle and not let him do his ultra violent, gory stuff for the third one. So he said no, and it's still an independent feature. And
Smart
whatever you think of
man.
the movies, I respect that. Like he's
No,
sticking with his vision. So,
no, that's good. Stay true to yourself. That is a lesson that I think can certainly tie together in any capacity, but certainly in the creative realm, it's important to have a vision and to not waver from it because it is so easy to compromise and forsake it just to get ahead a little bit or well, this will make more sense. You might make more money. Yeah, that may all be true and noted, and certainly, I'm not judging if someone does that, but if you have a vision, if you have a story, and you believe in it strong enough, yeah, damn it, stick with it because again, who knows what can happen. And I'll get off my soapbox right now because
well,
this could turn into a
I can
whole other
almost guarantee you,
conversation.
Ty West and Mia Goth probably didn't expect this. That they were making X and then their Pearl Passion Project. I'm sure they didn't expect it to take off like it did.
Oh no, again, I mean the costume from Pearl, I mean, I've seen it at Halloween. I've seen it all online. I mean, it's becoming part of the
She's an
culture, if you will.
icon. She's a
Exactly.
star.
She is a star. That's right. She got her wish after all, which, amen to that when life imitates art. I'm all in favor of that. But well, Anthony, this was fun. I want to
This was a
thank you. No,
blast.
again, you're this was a discussion that I was really looking forward to, and I think we had a pretty good open dialogue. We had some more overlap than I might have anticipated, but you know what? That's okay. We had a good dialogue, and I think we both have some similar points and differences when it comes to this film, and maybe in the same way that Halloween ends, I was able to bring you over to my side of the fence. Maybe I'll join you on your side down the road with Maxine. So maybe
I'm
you won't be
hoping.
alone for long, my friend.
I'm hoping that's the goal.
That's always the goal.
And I've had such a thank you so much for having me
Oh
on.
no,
This is so fun.
absolutely. Always welcome. Microphone is always on. So don't be a stranger. I want to say this is maybe your third. I think this is your third time on the show. Second time as a one-on-one guest. So again, the jerseys and placards will be in the mail. So look for those accordingly, and get you into, I'm sure, some local coffee shop. I don't know, but
Well, all I'll say is I can't wait till one day guest again, maybe during spooky season at some point to talk some other horror slashers. We'll see. So
Well, yeah, since you've brought it up, this is a good point here, folks. Since I mean, we are fast moving along. It's hard to believe we're almost at the middle of July, which means August is around the corner, and very soon it will be September. And when September shows up, I mean, pretty much we're in Halloween mode at this point after the 4th of July, as far as I'm concerned.
Michaels has their stuff out already. Where
There
it's
we go.
Halloween.
No, I'm counting down the days till autumn. So, my favorite time of the year is just around the corner. Not a summer person to say the least. But no, Anthony and I will be having a bit of a debate later this year, kind of at the start of spooky season. So look for it in a couple months, probably be in September. I don't have the exact date in front of me. It'll be closer to probably mid-September. So just kind of as spooky season starting to come into full force. But yeah, we're gonna have a debate, and I can guarantee you it will be much more lively, shall we say, not that this wasn't lively, but there will be a lot of passion with this debate. I'm not going to say what it's about because I will hold you in suspense with until we get closer. But we're going to be debating some iconic horror characters, and may the best man win. That's all I'm going to say. May the best man win. But Anthony, before I let you go, where can folks stalk you in the best possible way on social media and the like?
So, first of all, I do another show with you and our buddy Chris Evans of Gathering with the Geeks,
I
called
thought
DC
you looked
Unlimited.
familiar.
called DC Unlimited. We talk all things DC Comics, movies, James Gunn's reboot, lots of emphasis on Batman and Superman in particular. And that comes out maybe once every 2 weeks, and it's a lot of fun, lots of passion, lots of conspiracy theories, and we have a blast doing it. So follow us on Twitter at DC Unlimited Pod, and give us a share, a listen. It's really good. I also do a year-round Christmas podcast with my buddies Tom and Julia called "Tis the Podcast," where we cover a different movie, TV special, or TV episode, holiday themed, of course, throughout the year to keep that Christmas spirit alive, especially during the hot months of summer. It's a good listen to. But speaking of spooky season, we do spooky stuff all the time on our Patreon, but even in our main show, if you want to hear discussions about Pearl and X, me and our friend Cookie just did 2 retrospective episodes in preparation for MaXXXine. You can find those in the Tis a Podcast feed, wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll be doing a MaXXXine one in another week or two. So if you want to hear me wax poetic about MaXXXine and defend it some more against someone else who wasn't very high on it, check it out. And come September and October, we shift from Christmas a bit on the main show and talk Halloween stuff, including our second annual horror movie bracket episode. So think March Madness, 4 different divisions, and all pitting horror movies against one another to find the best one on the list that year. And this year we started recording it. They're long episodes, but we got through our remakes and requels divisions upon last recording. So just give you a hint about that. Those are really fun. So check it out. Tis a Podcast. Linktree.com/Tis a Podcast.
And I will have all that information in the show notes. And I would certainly encourage you to give a listen. I mean, certainly if Batman and superheroes are your jam, give us a follow and a listen on DC Unlimited. But I strongly would encourage anybody who was a fan of the holiday season, and particularly Christmas movies and all of that fun holly jolly episodes and whatnot, give Tis the Podcast a listen and a like, because they put out really incredible content, and there's passion behind every single episode. They love Christmas. They love talking holiday specials and holiday movies, and it's again, it's I can't help but have a big smile on my face every time they're talking about a film or a show, even if it's a much maligned Christmas sequel or whatnot. They always have to find they always find a clever way to come at it with some wit and some vigor. So I would encourage you just to give it a like, give it a listen, because it will certainly lift your spirits from episode to episode, and definitely keep you in the holiday mood all year round, if that is something that you find yourself needing. If you need a little Christmas, I would say check out the Tis the Podcast. But
I appreciate that, Phil. I just want to say, if you check it out, listeners, 8 years in, we are stretching the definitions of what could be constituted a Christmas movie or set at Christmas. For example, Jurassic World takes place over Christmas vacation, just saying. But 8 years in, we're stretching the definition. So
yeah, you got
it's
to do what you got to
Christmas,
do.
but it's also tons of pop culture movie stuff in general too. So check us out.
No, it's a great show. It has I give it the Phil seal of approval. So for what that's worth, buy probably a cup of coffee at best. But no, in all seriousness, it's a great show, and I look forward to it every week in my feed. So keep doing what you're doing,
Appreciate
buddy.
it.
But that does it for us today. Again, I want to thank Anthony for coming back on the pod and talking about the concluding chapter of the X trilogy, the now in the books MaXXXine. And that does it for me today. Again, as always, thank you for tuning in or watching the episode. I'll be back next week, and we will certainly do this all over again for the love of movies.